Welcome to G Fun Facts Online, the show that dives into the science behind our world. Have you ever looked at the stock market and thought, this makes no sense at all? One day it's soaring to record highs, the next it's crashing down. Or maybe you've wondered why entire countries can suddenly plunge into a recession, even when all the experts said things were looking good. The typical answers involve interest rates, trade deficits, and complex financial models. But what if I told you the most powerful, most unpredictable force driving our economies isn't found in a bank or a government building? What if it's found inside our own heads? Today, we're exploring the unseen engine of the economy, mass psychology. We're diving into the fascinating field of behavioral macroeconomics, which argues that our collective emotions, our mental shortcuts, and the stories we tell each other are what truly steer the fate of nations. For decades, the world of economics was built on a very specific idea of who we are. They imagined a person they called Homo economicus, the rational human. This theoretical person always makes perfectly logical decisions, always acts in their own best self-interest, and is never, ever swayed by emotion. It's a neat and tidy model, but as Nobel laureate George Akerlof once said, the goal of economics should be to force theory down to earth. And here on Earth, we are not always rational. We get swept up in the moment, we follow the crowd, we fear loss more than we enjoy gains. In short, we are human. And this is where behavioral economics steps in, blending psychology with economics to paint a much more realistic picture of how the world actually works. The story of this idea really takes off with one of the most famous economists in history, John Maynard Keynes. Back in 1936, in his revolutionary book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, Keynes identified something that cold, hard numbers just couldn't explain. He gave it a fantastic name, animal spirits. He argued that many of our biggest economic decisions, to start a business, to build a factory, to invest in a new idea, aren't the result of a careful mathematical calculation. He wrote, and I quote, "Most, probably, of our decisions to do something positive can only be taken as a result of animal spirits, of a spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction." These animal spirits are the collective mood of the economy. It's our shared confidence, our contagious fear, our waves of optimism and pessimism. When animal spirits are high, people feel good about the future. Businesses invest, consumers spend, and the economy grows. But when fear takes over, the herd instinct is to pull back. Businesses cancel projects, people save their money, and the economy shrinks, sometimes leading to a devastating recession. So what are these animal spirits made of? They're powered by glitches and shortcuts in our thinking, mental habits that psychologists call cognitive biases. When one person has a bias, it's a quirk. When millions of people share the same bias, it can move mountains of money. Let's look at a few of the biggest ones. First, there's herd behavior. This is our tendency to mimic the actions of a larger group, whether it's a good idea or not. In finance, this is huge. When an asset starts going up, people see others making money, and they jump in. Not because they've researched the company, but because they have a fear of missing out. This is how speculative bubbles are born, as everyone stampedes in the same direction. Of course, that stampede can turn and run the other way just as quickly, causing a market crash. Next up is overconfidence. We humans have a natural tendency to be overly optimistic about our own abilities and about the future. In a booming economy, everyone starts to feel like a financial genius. This leads to excessive risk-taking. People borrow too much, banks lend too easily, and investors make bets they don't fully understand, all because they're confident that the good times will keep rolling forever. Then there's one of the most powerful biases of all, loss aversion. Psychologically, the pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. This means that losing $100 feels way worse than finding $100 feels good. In the market, this makes investors do strange things. They might hold on to a losing stock for way too long, just to avoid the pain of admitting a loss. At the same time, they might sell a winning stock too early, just to lock in a small gain and avoid the risk of it turning into a loss. Finally, we have confirmation bias. This is our brain's habit of seeking out and believing information that confirms what we already think is true. If you believe the economy is heading for disaster, you'll click on every negative headline and dismiss any positive news. If you think a certain cryptocurrency is the future, you'll only listen to the gurus who agree with you. This creates echo chambers where our views become more and more entrenched, regardless of the actual data. Building on these ideas, another Nobel laureate, Robert Shiller, developed a theory he calls narrative economics. Shiller argues that popular stories, whether they are true or not, can go viral and have a massive influence on the economy. As he put it, we need to incorporate the contagion of narratives into economic theory. Otherwise, we remain blind to a very real, very palpable, very important mechanism for economic change. These narratives can be anything from the American dream of owning a home, which fueled the housing market for decades, to the story of a new economy where old rules don't apply. These stories give us a simple way to understand a complex world, and they drive our decisions about where to put our money and our faith. Okay, this all sounds interesting in theory, but where do we see it in the real world? Let's look at some famous examples. Think back to the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. The narrative was all about a new economy driven by the internet. The story was so powerful that herd behavior took over. Investors poured billions into any company with a .com in its name, ignoring old-fashioned things like profits. Overconfidence was off the charts. The bubble was pure animal spirits, and when it burst in 2000, it wiped out trillions of dollars. Or consider the 2008 global financial crisis. This was a perfect storm of behavioral biases. The dominant narrative was that house prices could never go down. This led to incredible overconfidence from banks, who gave out risky loans, and from home buyers, who took on mortgages they couldn't afford. When the bubble finally burst, the animal spirits flipped from wild optimism to sheer panic. Fear spread through the global system like a virus, causing a massive credit freeze and a worldwide recession. More recently, we saw the GameStop saga in 2021. This was a classic case of narrative economics in the age of social media. A community of retail investors on Reddit created a powerful story of Main Street taking on the Wall Street hedge funds. They coordinated their buying, driven by a mix of herding, a desire for collective action, and a compelling David versus Goliath narrative. They sent the stock price of a struggling video game retailer into the stratosphere, showing how a viral story can completely upend traditional market forces. And of course, there are the cryptocurrency bubbles. Markets like Bitcoin are often driven by a narrative of a decentralized financial future, combined with a massive dose of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Herd behavior is rampant, amplified by influencers on social media. The wild price swings and speculative frenzy are classic signs of a market being driven more by psychology than by any measurable intrinsic value. So, if our irrational brains are part of the problem, can they also be part of the solution? The answer, it seems, is yes. This is where we get the idea of a nudge, championed by economists Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. The idea is to design policies that gently nudge us towards better decisions, without taking away our freedom of choice. It's about working with our psychology, not against it. A classic example is automatic enrollment in retirement plans. We all know we should save for retirement, but many of us suffer from inertia. We just don't get around to it. So many companies now automatically enroll their employees in a savings plan. You can opt out if you want, but most people don't. This simple nudge, which uses our natural laziness for good, has dramatically increased participation. In one study, it boosted enrollment from 49% to a staggering 86%. Here's another one: getting people to pay their taxes on time. In the UK, the government started sending letters to late taxpayers that included a simple sentence: "Most people in your area have already paid their taxes." This little bit of information plays on our desire to conform to social norms. Nobody wants to be the odd one out. The result? This single nudge brought in millions of pounds in additional tax revenue, far more effectively than threatening letters. A final powerful example is organ donation. In countries where you have to opt in to be a donor, the rates are often very low, sometimes under 15%. But in countries that change the default to an opt-out system, where you are automatically considered a donor unless you specifically say no, consent rates often exceed 90%. It's the same decision, but changing the default option has a life-saving impact. Now, behavioral macroeconomics isn't a magic bullet, and it has its critics. Some argue that it's just a collection of interesting anecdotes rather than a single, unified theory. Others say that while nudges are clever, they aren't powerful enough to solve huge problems like a global recession. And there are valid ethical questions about where we draw the line between a helpful nudge and outright manipulation. The road ahead will likely involve blending these psychological insights with big data and even neuroscience to create more sophisticated models. But the central lesson is already clear. Economies are not machines. They are deeply, profoundly human systems. They are driven by our hopes, our fears, our biases, and the stories we choose to believe. By understanding this unseen engine of mass psychology, we stand a much better chance of navigating the turbulent waters of the global economy, and maybe, just maybe, building a more stable and prosperous future for everyone. So the next time you see a market soar or a panic spread, remember the animal spirits. It's not just about money and math, it's about us. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online.